We are down to our final presentation, which I've been looking forward to for the whole day because I have a feeling that Debbie's just going to tie everything together in a nice little bow. Uh, no pressure, Debbie.
No pressure, Debbie.
So, so this is Succeeding in Coding in Higher Education, presented by Deborah Armstrong. And we're gonna kind of do we're gonna throw some questions at Debbie, and she's just gonna go for it. And yeah, feel free to put some questions in the chat. And Debbie, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I've turned on my video now, but I'm going to turn it off in a minute because I'm reading my notes on the Monarch. And so
Woo!
it's a
Good
big
plug there.
puppy. Yeah, it's a huge puppy. So if I'm in front of it, I'm not in front of my screen.
Yes.
Yeah, but I did turn my video on briefly so y'all could see me, and then I'm going to switch it back off when I start looking at my notes. My name's Debbie Armstrong. I am 68. I have worked for the last 24 years at a community college, and actually, she was talking about Santa Clara University. I work at De Anza College, which is very close to Santa Clara University. And before that, for 30 years, I was a software engineer. And if you do the math, you'll see those things overlap. But actually, I started writing code when I was not even drinking age yet. And then I have picked up a few contracts here and there. And that's why the 24 years at the college and the 30 years as a software engineer do overlap. And one of my passions is trying to see that our blind and visually impaired students do succeed in STEM courses, and it is not always been successful. I have worked with students who have failed miserably, and I have worked with students who have succeeded beautifully. I am not faculty, I am staff. I'm more like a care coordinator for students than a professor. So that's my introduction, and please ask your next question.
Okay. Um, well, quite frankly, and this is I'm sure a burning question for everybody, but what are the top skills that students are missing when they get into college?
Well, the big one is typing, and you're going to be surprised. But the reason that occurs is because many of the students I get in community college are just beginning to lose their vision. You know, RP is very common, and so people have gotten through high school using a magnifier, but now they're getting into college and their vision isn't that good, and so they never really had to learn to type, right? They don't necessarily know their access technology. So they can kind of fake it in other courses using their iPhone or their Braille note or visually using a CCTV and handwriting. But when they try to take STEM classes, if they don't have the access technology and the typing, that's a real big issue.
Hmm.
I tend to
Jeff?
babble, so I'm being really careful not to do
Yeah.
that.
I was going to ask Debbie too. Debbie, so do you, just out of curiosity, because you've been around a minute or two, kind of
Mhm,
like myself,
mhm.
has this been a change from what you recall in previous generational, like say in the last couple of classes? Has this become progressively a bigger issue with folks not being able to type? And do you, like I sometimes think, is it because we all tie to our phones so much and we are so used to swipe or one finger typing that folks aren't really focused on keyboarding as much as they should be.
I
Or do
used
you?
to think so, but when I started analyzing it, what I realized was that I work at a community college. So if you're going to go to a university like Santa Clara University or UC Irvine, where Isabella came from, you have to enroll and apply and get accepted. When you go to community college, you just basically have to live in the state and you can go often for free or for very little money. So community college is open to the community, and those are any people who want to better themselves with a career. And so that's why I'm seeing what feels like more students who don't know how to type, but in fact, what I'm seeing is community members who've decided they want to go to college. And you know, when I was growing up back in the 60s, the ideal job often promoted for blind people was small engine repair. Well, we don't have that anymore. So, because we're such a service-based economy now, blind people have to take jobs that involve using computers.
Fair,
Okay.
good
How,
observation.
yeah, yeah. Well, and just to hone that point, Michael was using a lot of keyboard commands. He was typing code directly in, like you know. So,
Right,
um,
right.
I was going to point out to everyone that Debbie has provided us some a resource page that you'll find in the Google Docs, and so I mean I could ask you to expand on if you have a student that enters college and is not quite prepared, or you have we all suffer for the same phenomenon. There's only so many hours in the day, and as a busy TVI, how do I fit everything in? So let's say for those kids, and we have a lot more of this generation being homeschooled. What do you say to students who their typing skills just aren't up to par and they're already at the college?
Well, first of all, pick a college that's going to teach you those skills. Colleges really, really vary. But if you're going to community college, there's plenty of them around, and you're going to find colleges that have a program in typing because sighted kids don't know how to type either. They're going to need to know how. And so you're going to find plenty of training. There's also a lot of accessible typing tutors, and I had a big list here. I can go back and find that list if you want.
I
There's
can read the list for you if you'd like.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Okay. So the list that, and this isn't everyone because we know there's lots of programs out there, but some of the ones that are common out there is Talking Typer, of course, from APH. There is Typability from Yes Accessibility. Keystroke from New Mexico Commission for the Blind. Typeo with Accessibite. And there are several others that I can think of, even sometimes depending on the student's vision level. Maybe it's type. There's an endless number of typing programs out there. So.
Right. So it's really important that you either work on your own to learn to type with one of these typing tutors, or you pick a place that's going to teach it to you. If you have a local rehab center for the blind, I know we have the orientation center for the blind here in California. They can teach you typing too. So, you want to talk to your rehab counselor and say, look, I don't know how to type. I need to learn this. And my vision is going, or whatever. Also, when you are in high school, you might want to think about taking typing. One of the things that I see happens a lot is that these devices like the Braille Note and the Braille Sense get heavily marketed to schools and TVIs, and it's really great for a blind child to sit down and use one of those things. But once you start becoming a teenager, you need to move away from that and learn to use a computer so you can compete with your sighted colleagues. And
mm.
if what you've been using is a braille sense for everything, you need to motivate yourself to go take a typing class or learn how to use access technology. And the other thing I would say while we're talking about this is don't worry about if you have some vision about people telling you, you have to learn Braille, you have to learn this, you have to learn that. You take it one step at a time. You might, for example, use your vision the same way I'm using the Monarch here. I'm looking at my notes with the Monarch, but I can still read with speech. And so you might find that you want to look at some things with your vision while you're learning to use speech. So again, don't get overwhelmed. Simply a little bit every single day. If you start learning JAWS and you're doing a little bit every day and you're still using your vision, that is fine because I'm still using Braille when I'm using speech. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And Isabel said earlier, you need all the tools in your toolbox. And I
Absolutely.
definitely use a combination. I use my Mantis Braille display, I use magnification, and I use JAWS because some things it's going to work better for one than the other. So.
Debbie, both you and Leslie have kind of already touched on it, but could you talk a little bit about access technology and the needs and how that serves students at the secondary level and what barriers may be in place for that to be successful in the college level?
Well, it is super important you know how to use a computer. If you want to learn to Mac, that's great, but you'll find more jobs are in Windows. So if what you want to do is be employable, you really do need to sit down and learn Windows again a little bit at a time. You don't want to get overwhelmed, but if you don't have a Windows computer, You should talk to your rehab counselor or check with Computers for the Blind, or become very familiar with access to computers in your high school or on your college campus. And again, if you feel a little bit insecure about your access technology or your typing skills, you don't want to apply to a high-powered university, no matter what your family and everyone else tells you. You want to go to community college where you're going to get all this extra help learning all these things. Again, one step at a time. You might want to transfer to Stanford or Harvard, but it's perfectly okay to start at your local podunk college. So you have the tutoring and the assistance that you need.
Yeah, set yourself up for success.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And this, I think, in addition, I know not all colleges are created equal. You kind of touched on, and we've heard a few times
Hmm.
throughout the day that some universities are equipped to, they have a broad production studio. Many do not have that. It is important if you happen to have, you need to know your needs and to know what's actually available through the college because picking that argument out the gate is probably not setting you up for success in my experience. So, can you talk a little bit about, as far as how do you find those colleges? What would you encourage folks to look at to make sure they're going to receive the types of supports that they might require, whether it's the community college or beyond?
Well, what you want to do is you want to show up for an informational interview. You can call them and say, I want to talk to Disability Services. I want to learn about what services I can expect if I come to your college, sort of like a pre-sales call. And if you meet with someone who's friendly and gives you a list of services that sound like it's something you're going to be able to use, then that might be a good place to go. My college is known for high quality services to learning disabled students. So actually 80% of the students I serve have learning disabilities. And you're going to say, well, what does that matter in this call? Well, it matters a lot because when I hear about a learning disabled student who wants to come to our college, I often am asked to meet with them and talk with them about what we can do for them. And that often makes the student decide that he's willing to get on the bus for 2 hours to get to our college because he's happy that we have so many services that are going to assist him. And the same is true if you're a blind student. You might need to interview several different colleges to find out who has the disability services that are going to best support you.
I like how you phrase that, Deborah, as far as the student or the consumer needs to be prepared to interview the college. I think
Hmm.
so many of us get are in this mode that we are being interviewed and being screened for whether we are going to be able to contribute to this community or be successful at the college level. But it's equally important to self-advocate is kind of what you're leaning at, right?
That's right. That's right. And I often talk to parents and students who are trying to find out if we're going to have the services that they need. And I have some notes here on a previous question, if I can go through them quickly. There are
Sure.
many free sources on the internet, so you don't always have to depend on a college to learn how to use all this stuff. Um, there's the ACB community calls, and I have some of this in my links that I
Yes.
sent you guys. There's the
Mhm.
New York Public Library, which has free trainings. There's Freedom Scientific has all these webinars. Microsoft has websites on how to do particular tasks with a screen reader. So you want to really look for some of these free trainings that are out there, and um, there's David Kingsbury's book. I've got this giant list. I don't have time to read it all, but I want you guys to know that you don't have to always learn every single thing from your college when it comes to access technology. There's a lot out there to teach you. And I never went to one of those blindness centers. I just taught myself of all the stuff that was out there on the web.
Self-motivated.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, well, in that vein, where did you go to college and what did you study?
Um, so I am not a math nerd. I went to Chabot College in Hayward, and then I went to UC Berkeley, and I studied comparative literature. I wanted to be a journalist, and they had changed the journalism major to mass media, and I was really disappointed. So I studied comparative literature. And the way I got into computers was that my best friend, I'm terrible and my math skills are abysmal. In fact, my math skills are so abysmal that I wrote software to balance my checkbook because I couldn't do it.
No, but that's kind
And
of impressive.
I
Yeah.
know. So anyway, my best friend when I was 19, she told me that she thought I would be really good with computers. And we're talking about 1980 now. And I said, "No, I'd be terrible at computers. I hate computers. I don't want to learn anything about computers." She said, I bet if you spent a month doing everything you can to learn about computers, you would be good with them." And so she bet me, I think it was like a free lunch or something, if I spent a month doing things to learn computers. So I put up a sign at Berkeley saying that I would type for quadriplegics. And I got hired by all these quadriplegics to type in those days it was terminals connected to mainframes. And so I was down in the bowels of Evans Hall. I was sitting on their wheelchair foot pedals so they could see above my head, and I would type code into the mainframe for them. Well, it wasn't hard. And, when I realized I was doing their homework for them, um, I realized, oh, wow, I really am good at computers. So anyway, I put an ad in the paper that said blind student seeks donation of computers for school and personal use. And then I took a really beginning class at a community college, not at Berkeley, because I wasn't really Berkeley material yet, at least for computer stuff. And I was donated computers. And so I started teaching myself using the donated computers. They were old computers from people's basements. I had an old TRS-80 and an old Apple II. And yeah, so that's how I taught myself how to use computers.
Just exploring and trying new things. How about that?
And I got the free lunch or whatever it was
Well,
my best friend gave me after a month of doing computer stuff. And that's something else I want to say too. You may take some computer science classes and say, ugh, this is not for me. But the thing is, if you learned a little bit about computers, you have skills that are going to prepare you for other jobs, even something like social work. I mean, you'll see sighted social workers who don't know how to use a spreadsheet, and you'll be going, spreadsheets, they're so much easier than those computer science classes I struggled through. So, yeah, I mean, it's okay if you discover you don't have a talent for X, but you do have a talent for Y.
that's a very good point. And also trying it from different angles. Taking one class with one person is not the same as taking the same class from a different person. They might bring up something that really strikes your interest.
Oh, and I have that in my notes too. So if you were in high school, you might have had an aide who assisted you. I was an early experiment in mainstreaming, so I didn't get any aids. But nowadays, I see that most of my high school students with disabilities, with print disabilities, have someone in the classroom who assists them. Well, when you go to college, you're not going to have that aid. You're going to go to a class, and the instructor is going to say, all right, now I just clicked on the green box, and then I went down here and I clicked over here, and I'm going to go down here and see what happened. Now, see how that turned blue? And then see this thing that's underlined? Let's click over here and you're going to go,
Hmm.
I don't
Hmm.
think I'm going to survive in this class. So what's going to happen is you are going to drop that class and you are going to look for an instructor who's going to be more accessible. Again, you have your whole life ahead of you. So it's okay if you don't succeed in the first class and you try another one. And you don't want computer science or Spanish 3 or whatever to be your first class when you get to college. You want to take public speaking. You want to take something easy while you learn your way around campus, while you learn the disability services, and while you start making friends with the professor so you can find out who's going to support you in your learning. Because you are going to run across people who do not support you in your learning. But that's okay, because in the real world, you're going to find bosses who don't support you in your employment. So you might as well practice with these difficult professors.
Boy, that's true.
It's so funny. I took a class in Perl a few years ago because I wanted to use it in my job. Perl is a programming language. And okay, so I'm 65, right? I show up at this class with my guide dog and my laptop and everything. And the instructor comes over to me and he says, Well, I don't think you'll be very successful in this class. You really have to see to do this. And I
Oh,
said, Sir, I have been a software engineer for 30 years. I think I can make that decision on my own.
good for
But
you.
when you're a young person, you can't have that kind of confidence. You haven't had 30
No.
years of experience. So you basically can see these difficult people as practice for succeeding in your future career. And don't let them get you down because if you work with them, you may turn them around. I turned this guy around. I got an A in his class, and now he welcomes blind students. But the thing is, you don't have to take any failure as anything more than a learning experience.
That is so true. And it is very difficult, like you said, when you're young and just trying to get that kind of negative feedback from the beginning to have the wherewithal to continue. I have certainly experienced that, and usually my response is usually like, well, uh, can I at least try? And usually that makes them take a step back and go, oh, well, yeah, I'm not going to stop you from trying. You
Exactly, exactly. But don't let it discourage you.
know.
Your learning style and their teaching style may not mesh. I had a disabled student who was in tears about a situation where she didn't mesh with her professor. And so it doesn't just happen to blind people, it happens to everybody.
Yeah. Yep.
I kind of that idea between that and advocacy. So for students who may have been less than supported in high school or throughout school or encouraged into the areas of coding and computer sciences, um, do you have any suggestions or advice for young folks transitioning in toward either to college or post high school life when they're really interested in learning more about coding and finding a community that might be supportive of their needs outside the actual educational realm? Do you have any experience or suggestions or recommendations on how a young person might find resources and a network to support their desire to learn more about the computer sciences?
Well, you want to connect with other blind people who are interested in this topic. Now, if you're involved in NFB, there's NFB in computer science. They have a mailing list, and they're also an affiliate or a chapter. I don't remember the right term. I am very involved in Blind Information Technology Specialist, which is BITS, BITS, which is part of ACB. And you can certainly join both. Nobody's going to give you a hard time about it anymore.
Heck,
Um, and I know in BITS, in fact, I just finished being their education chair. We have another person doing it now because we're trying to encourage more young people to be leaders in our group. And last year we taught Python, we taught HTML, we taught WordPress, we taught Office, and we're going to be teaching an advanced Python class in January. And these classes are all free if you join our affiliate. So again, if you're connected with one of the blindness organizations and you tell them, I'm interested in STEM, I'm interested in learning more about writing code, can you hook me up with someone who can mentor me? You're going to get a lot of help there.
well, that leads me pretty nicely into another question, which is when it comes to coding languages, where have you found major accesses and struggles?
Okay, so when you're beginning to take classes, you're going to be looking for classes that are text-based and not graphical.
Mm,
So most languages are text-based, but often the beginner classes are very graphical. So, for example, if you were to take Visual Basic, it's a very simple language, but the first class might have you moving items around on the screen and then writing little snippets of code that attach to those items. So you might stick a checkbox on screen and then write an action for that checkbox. So
hmm,
to get the or and if you have some vision, this can be okay. If you don't have some vision, you may be spending more time trying to figure out the accessibility to move that checkbox around on the screen than you are writing the code, which is what you're supposed to be learning.
right.
um, I do love Python. It's a really easy language. It's also a very complicated language and a language that's used in industry, and there are many accessible tools for working with it. Again, this is another reason that if you're connected with a blindness organization and you have someone who can mentor you, they can say, okay, this tool is accessible, this tool is not. Go in and talk to your instructor and tell them, I'm sorry, I can't use the tool you're using in class, but I can use this tool. For example, I love Visual Studio Code. And so, which is what she was using in the last presentation.
Hmm.
And a lot of blind programmers love Visual Studio Code. And so, if I were to take another programming class, I would go in with my laptop. I'd show the professor Visual Studio Code. I'd say, look, I may not be able to use your tools, but I can use this and I can still do the homework. So it's really important to either research yourself what tools are going to work for you if you choose a language to learn, or have a mentor in one of the blindness organizations who can assist you with that. And uh, there's several email lists for blind programmers that are just ready to help you. Or like if you joined BITS or NFB in computer science, there are people out there who volunteer their time. We at BITS volunteer hours and hours of time to teach these courses. Nobody's getting paid. So
That is fabulous. And I did add those links to the links document in
good,
the
good, good,
shared folder.
good, good.
Debbie, I wanted to just quickly circle back. You had touched on note taking, and you had described that a lot of students have benefited from having dedicated note takers before they come to college. I worked at a community college as well, and we did provide note takers, but I always, that was always a conversation I had as an advisor with students about the pros and cons of note takers. And I think for blind low vision students, there's a little bit different slant on when to use a note take a personal or a person as a note taker versus taking your own notes. Could you talk about some of the pros and cons on that just briefly?
So with each class you take, it's going to be a little different. So being aware of the pros and cons is really important. So first of all, let me go over a couple of pros of taking your own notes. And that is you're kind of in charge of them. You're not dependent on what someone else thinks is important. And you can use whatever tools you want. I like to use my iPhone and a Bluetooth keyboard. That's how I usually take notes. Even in a Zoom call, that's what I like to do. But but you can also use a laptop, or you can use a Braille slate and stylus for all. So you have control over it. But let me go over a couple of cons. One of the cons is that if you're so wrapped up in taking your notes, you may not hear what the professor's saying. And so you might want to record the class and then later on take notes from the recording, which can reinforce your learning. It takes longer though. So if it's a simple class where you feel like, well, I understand most of it, you're probably better off taking your own notes. But if it's a really complicated class, you may be better off recording and taking notes from the recording. The other thing to think about is if your DSS pays for note takers or provides note takers, you might want that note taker to spend their time copying what's on the whiteboard or writing down what's being shown on the video while you transcribe in your own notes what the professor is saying. And for example, we really encourage our deaf students to take their own notes. And you may say, why would you want a deaf student to take notes? They can see perfectly well. But here's the thing, the deaf person is looking at the interpreter or the captioner. They're trying to look at the whiteboard. They're trying to look at the video the instructor is saying. They've got this only one sense where they're trying to process everything. And we blind people have the same problem. And so we may be missing important things that the instructor is writing on the whiteboard. I took a bunch of Spanish classes over the last couple of years, and one of the things that I did, now Spanish is very verbal, so I was able to take notes fine, but every time the instructor wrote something on the blackboard, I had one of my friends in class snap a picture of the blackboard and then later read it out loud to me while I recorded what was in that picture. And then we did a trade. So, and symbiosis is so, so important. So, for example, in the Spanish class, What I did is I gave this person in class who was taking all those pictures a copy of all my notes. I was typing them on my iPhone with my Bluetooth keyboard. And so I would just, send them over to the student at the end of class. So they didn't have to write down everything the professor said. All they had to do was sit around and take pictures, which is super duper easy. I got the hard work. But then they had to read to me everything in the pictures they took. So it was a really nice symbiosis. And I got an A in all my Spanish classes doing it that way. And I never had to worry about missing anything that was on the board.
Something you said reminded me of in high school and always being encouraged to take notes. And it always seemed to me to be just another task that I was being asked to do and a chore. And it wasn't until college that I did start to understand, like what you said about it reinforcing the learning
Hmm.
and how important that is. I relied so heavily on my memory in high school. And when you get to college, just like with the math, the amount and the complexity just keeps going up, and you're eventually going to reach maximum capacity.
There's something else I always tell my students, and that is if you feel insecure about taking notes, go home, get out your note taking supplies, and take notes on the evening news. Because guess what? It doesn't matter if you miss the latest thing President Trump said. But if you practice taking notes by watching the news, and there's no stress, right? So then when you get to
Yeah.
class and you have to take notes on a situation where you might need that information to pass an exam, you've already got the skills.
I love that example. It is it is a skill and you do need practice, and a low stress practice is perfect. It's excellent.
To summarize, I just sounds to me as though it's a critical skill for students' success at the college level to know the purpose of your note taker and be prepared to give direction and not have the expectation that that note taker knows what your needs are.
Exactly. And
Hmm.
I really encourage you to get that note taker to do the visual stuff, the
Yeah.
stuff that you might miss. That's what you want to be sure. Because anything you miss that you wrote down that the professor said, you can always meet him on office hours and ask, what was a regular expression? I didn't quite understand that. Can you explain it to me clearly? But if it's something that's on the whiteboard or in a video, you may not even know it's there. And so that's what you want your note taker to focus on for you.
Debbie, I know a lot of your experience personally was you kind of taught yourself to code, but
Hmm.
in your experience of supporting students who have gone the route of coding, trying to bring it a little closer to home,
Hmm.
how have you seen note taking or content being presented that perhaps that a talented note taker or knowing what you need from that note taker, how does that make the difference between coding class being accessible or adequate or not at all?
Well, one of the things that happens is a lot of instructors in coding classes will demonstrate on the screen what they're doing, and so it's really helpful if you have a note taker who can type, who can enter some of that stuff. The other thing is it's not just about using a note taker, it's about talking to the professor to make sure that you get the slides ahead of time.
Mm.
If it's a textbook where a lot of the code is images, finding out if the code that's in the textbook is available for you to download. If the instructor is demonstrating code, talking to them in class about, can you send me a copy? Can you email a copy of what you're going to demonstrate? So,
Yes.
it's not just working with some student note taker. It's more than that.
It goes back to the
Hmm.
self-advocacy piece.
Hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
I know that I had a very gifted blind student who finished their associate's degree while finishing high school and was in computer sciences, and we were successful in that. But we were all very surprised by because we all know how accessible the digital world is and how the potential for computers to make break down these barriers. But we did find some of the computer science folks being some of the most challenging to get them to understand why we would need access to notes or why that digital content being given to us ahead of time or in some type of text format or emailed ahead of time was so critical to the success of a student. It struck me as interesting at least. So
Yes, it's the same with our computer science faculty too. Many of them are just not very supportive. But again, I would say it can be a real chance to learn to advocate for yourself. And you can decide whether or not it's going to be stressful for you. Because this learning to advocate for yourself is going to be a skill that you are going to need in your career. And so if you see it as a skill building exercise and you just have to do it. You have to bring in your laptop or you have to drag them over to the computer access lab and say, this is a screen reader, this is what it does, this is how I work. And sometimes, I am lucky that because I have a lot of these skills already, it's one of the reasons that I'm valued in my job because I can demonstrate this stuff to professors. I had a student who was complaining his book wasn't accessible, and I dragged the professor into my office and showed it on my computer and why the screen reader wouldn't read it. And so it's but you need to find people who can help you advocate, but you also need to advocate yourself. And you are going to meet those barriers. We have those barriers still.
Well, that's a piece of self-advocating is knowing where your teammates are and how to access them.
Hmm. Yes, making friends in the disabled student services is very, very important. Knowing those people, knowing who is going to help you, knowing who is just putting in the time until they retire and doesn't really care. I'm 68, but I'm a big advocate for my students. I can I tell you guys a funny story? This
Please.
is how the blind person fixed the CCTV. So I had a low vision student who said, I can't see my TV in this classroom. I can't see my magnifier. I just can't see anything. And I went into the classroom with a student and I walked over to the window and I opened the window blinds and she said, oh. And then I had another classroom where there was all this glare. I mean, I walked in and at that time I had light perception, so I could see all the sun. And I was like, well, no wonder she can't see anything. And I went over to the window and I closed the window blinds and she said, oh, I can see my TV now. So, you need people who are going to, get off of their butt and go with you to talk to the professor and help you.
Yes. And knowing your own accommodations, knowing what you need from the start, but also knowing that those might need to be flexed. Like, okay, I never
Hmm.
experienced this in high school, so maybe I need to do something different now.
That's right. That's right. You're not on your own. And there's this whole balancing act where, I have had, so I want to tell you about two of my blind students. So I had one blind student who, she was standing in line, waiting in a long line for a restroom. And I went up to her and I said, you know what? I can show you where there's another restroom right around the corner. And she's like, no, I don't want to do it. There's a big crowd out there and I don't want all those people running into me. Okay, so this is the student who is afraid to do anything. Now, afraid to ask for help, afraid to accept help. And then there's the other student, my other student, who he was losing his vision and he was walking around campus without a cane or a dog, so he kept falling down the stairs. He wouldn't ask for help. He wouldn't tell people he couldn't read signs. And one day it was 100 degrees outside. He was wandering around our 112-acre campus and he got heat stroke and had to be taken to the hospital because he didn't want to admit he couldn't see the signs on the buildings. And so what we've got is young people who are afraid to ask for help or young people who don't know how to do anything. And so you need to be balanced in between being able to do things yourself and not being afraid to ask for help. And so it's so important to be willing to accept help and yet be also willing to try on your own. And when I see a big difference between students who show up who are 17 and students who leave college at 24. And it's because they have learned that balancing act between when to do it themselves and when to ask others for assistance.
Deborah, I wanted to ask, I think you and I and most of well, several of us come from a more traditional educational background, meaning we went to college, whether it was community college or, university, and we went face to face and we had to be there. We either lived on campus or lived close by, and it didn't differentiate too much from our high school routines other than we didn't have our whole day in campus, but there was an expectation that we work more independently. Of
Right.
course, we have seen this dramatically change. Pandemic absolutely pushed it even further forward, where we're seeing a lot more opportunities for online learning. And as I see so many positives there. It's a double-edged sword both ways, but in recognition of different learning styles and the fact that I know one barrier to blind adults sometimes getting successful jobs or retaining those jobs was other parts of the ECC, getting to work, the logistics of transportation.
Oh,
But in
yeah.
this day and age, we have so much opportunity online, and that's where coding really resonates for me. Could you just touch on a little bit of what your thoughts are for blind and low vision learners when it comes to online versus in-person education at the secondary level?
Well, there's lots of advantages and disadvantages to taking an online class. So your big advantage is going to be that you can take notes verbally. I mean, you can pick up your tape recorder and you can just take notes with your own voice because no one's going to hear you, right? And I really like that. I like to chatter at my tape recorder while I'm trying to figure something out and go back later and hear that. I mean, people have different ways of learning, but for me, I really like that about an online class. Another thing is many online classes are recorded, so you can go back over the lectures. You can go at your own pace many times. Many of the classes are still synchronous, but you might get lessons released on Monday and have until Friday to do it. So you've got a little more flexibility. Also, you'll often find more materials are accessible. So, like instead of the instructor showing the slides in class, he may share screen in a lecture, but he's going to be posting those slides online for students to study too. So you'll find a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times an online class is more accessible. Also, more and more colleges audit those online classes and require that the instructor provide accessible materials. So when you complain if something isn't accessible, they often have to fix it. So, yeah, those are the good things about being online. But being online can be very isolating. You don't have other students that you can chat with about the class. You don't have other people that you can work together with. It's harder to work in teams. I mean, so many times I've turned to someone in class and said, "What did he just post?" Or what's going, oh, we're all in groups and we're all milling around. Why are we doing this? So when you're in a class of other people, you can make friends with people who you can help and they can help you. And if you're able to give them help, they're more willing to help you. So you've got that team learning experience. It's very rewarding. So yeah, if you are a bit of an extrovert, you're not going to be as happy in an online class. And if you do well in in-person classes, I would say try to stay away from online classes unless you really need the access or you have a job. Like for me, I have a job, so sometimes I can only take an online class, even though I'd rather do it in person. Trying to look through my notes here. I don't know if I missed any of the advantages.
I can hear
I
that
would say
monarch
hear that
refreshing.
Yes,
hear that
yes.
monarch
So
refresh. I love that sound.
yeah, so my little moniker is going clickety clack here. Yeah, well, I'm trying to see if I had, because I've got notes spread out here in Braille on a piece of paper, and then I've got notes on my monarch because I had so many insights to share, and I wanted to make sure I got them all.
I
But
know
no,
that one of the advantages that I've listened out of pandemic learning for, specifically for a lot of our low vision learners, whose typical struggles is distance vision, that online learning kind of leveled the playing field for them, where this was a advocacy role where these students were either having to draw attention or get the attention of their instructors because so much was being presented at distance and not being read aloud, and that distant access was a constant barrier to them being successful, or it's an additional barrier to or struggle for them. And so I know that I saw a lot of students really excel during online learning because suddenly their barrier was eliminated and they
you
had
can
full access.
magnify that shared screen.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. I think I did list all the advantages and
I think
disadvantages,
you
though.
did a good job. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to move on in kind of the next area and get a little more geeky.
Hmm.
I know that you have at least some experience, if not deep experience, in many different computer language codes. Um, what has your experience have been? Again, I know you started real early on, but and some of those codes, I believe all the codes you are still around. But what are some of the ones that you found that were the most accessible? What were some of the barriers to those codes? Was it the coding itself, or was it the level of instruction? Was it the way the screen reader or braille display could help you display those kinds of things? If you could talk a
So
little bit about
computer
that.
programs are written in different computer languages.
Right.
In the old days, of course, COBOL was the language of business, and BASIC was the language for learning. And so nowadays we have a huge number of languages, but only a small subset tend to be taught in college. Um, the most common language taught in college is a language called C. That's just the letter C. And I think it's the most common language because it's been around for a long time and a lot of old duffers know it. So a lot of old duffer professors know it. C, in my opinion, is a wonderful language if you want to work close to the machine. If like you're writing a device driver, you're writing the software that controls your printer, for example, or the software that creates speech is probably written in C. Windows is probably written mainly in C. So it's an it's a language that can be difficult to learn as your first language, but as a language you're going to have to know if you're going to be professionally employed as a computer programmer. C has a couple advantages. It's very concise. Most lines in C will fit on a 40-cell braille display. It's a concise language. It uses a lot of punctuation for things that other languages might use words. So a language might say let x equals, and C might just say x equals, or a language might say multiply, and C would just use an asterisk. And in C, two equal signs or two asterisks is different than one equal sign and one asterisk. So it's really nice to work in, but it's terrible to learn as a first language. So yes, you'll have to learn it, but don't do it as your first language if you can possibly avoid it. Basic is now called Visual Basic. And its idea is it's an introduction to programming that's very, very easy to master. But it's almost always taught in a graphical environment. And so that can be challenging for a blind person. If you do have a tutor who's willing to work with you and they can do the graphical things like they can move the mouse around and click on stuff, it's perfectly okay to take Visual Basic because if you're programming in a professional capacity, you're not going to be moving the mouse around and clicking on stuff. You're going to be typing into your computer, and the only reason it starts out being graphical is because that's a soft way to introduce it to those visually oriented sighted people. And so let me see. So Java is a language that was designed to I guess, demonstrate all that best aspects of programming languages. And so Java is something called object oriented. And it would, if you take a Java class, it will teach you how to write programs properly, the academic way, the way that, people feel is appropriate for writing code that is easy to follow and easy to understand. And Java is a pretty accessible language. It's not usually taught in a graphical manner. But again, you may not want it to be your first language just because it's a little bit complicated. Some of the concepts are more complicated. Um, I tend to really like Python. I think Python is a really nice beginner language. There are lots of accessible tools for it, so I would recommend it. I have a personal love for Perl, Perl, but that's because it was written by an English professor, and I still have a lot of roots in English and literature, and I'm much more of a text person than I am a math person. And in fact, many of the programs I write, even now as a hobby, are to manipulate text, to for example, I wrote a program to take all those 40 cell Braille books that I want to read on my Monarch in 32 cells and convert it so that it's easier to read on the Monarch. So I tend to love Perl for that because it makes working with text so much easier. Languages. What other languages could I talk about? I guess, oh, and JavaScript. So JavaScript is not Java, it just sounds like it. It is a language that is built into the web. You saw in the last presentation how LaTeX was sort of built into XML, into HTML. JavaScript is the same thing. It's a programming language that's built into web browsers. And it is a lovely first language. And if I was running the world and I wanted blind programmers to learn a first language, JavaScript would be the one that I want them to learn. But JavaScript is often seen as sort of a baby language. It's like, oh, it's just not a real language. No one would really have a job doing it. So it's a little like Quorum in that Quorum is often taught to K-12 students, but it's not seen as a real professional language. And there's a little bit of that because JavaScript is what web developers use. It's not what real programmers use. And I'm saying that in quotes. So if you want to teach yourself a language, I would say teach yourself JavaScript or teach yourself Python. They will be the lowest barriers to success. And you can get plenty of books from Bookshare on both of those languages. That was a
Ye-
long speech.
no, but that's actually really helpful. And like I know for students that are interested in taking the AP computer science test, that is a lot of Java.
Hmm.
So, again, setting yourself up for success, learning something simpler to begin with before diving in is good to know. I know that one thing that I struck me about LaTeX was that it it made a lot of sense as far as the initials they were using. You could kind of guess at what math component they were for, and that kind of aids in the learning of the code itself. But in that regard, it strikes me that learning the code isn't so difficult, but learning the structure and the concepts around how the logic of it is more of the challenge with some. What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, hmm.
Or am I totally
Uh,
off base?
no, no. I mean, when I was like, you know what? I really should learn LaTeX because it looks so easy. I mean, to me, it came across as so easy. And like I told you, I'm not a math nerd.
Yeah.
But if I knew it, this would be a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Deborah, you
So
may have meant, oh, I'm sorry, Leslie,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead.
Um, I was kind of curious. And I think you touched on this earlier, but I to bring you back to currently because I know you dabble in coding. It sounds like
Hmm.
you're a hobbyist, we'll call you, but a very skilled hobbyist. When you're in your current work, when you're doing coding, do you have a preferred method? Because I know your access has changed over the years. I assume over 30 years. From I would assume that early on you were much more reliant on auditory. But in your current situation, I know you have a Monarch. Um, what other ways, or do you have any words of encouragement of best access? Or I know it's a personal preference, but when you're getting into coding, I always think like it's really down to the nitty-gritty details. What tools do you find to be the most helpful when you are dabbling with coding?
Well, so this monarch actually, I'm field testing for APH. So this monarch is delicate, and I do not carry it around. It sits here on my desk at home. So I wrote more code using an LSE reader. Truthfully,
Okay.
I hook it up to my laptop or my iPhone, and I type into it. I am a hobby programmer, but I program in my job a lot because, like for example, I have this awful database that I have to log all my contacts with students. And so I wrote a few programs to access the data more easily and to do reports. And I did a lot of that with my laptop at NLSE reader so I could go hang out around outside and, all that and not be stuck in the office all day. And I I I'm okay. I like Braille. I've read Braille since I was 5, and I'm a very fast Braille reader. I'm probably one of the fastest Braille readers I know. I can read successfully out loud, for example. But I wrote a majority of my code using speech, and so I feel equally comfortable using speech. In fact, I wrote something that a lot of people don't know about me is I wrote the fourth screen reader for the IBM PC when I was 20. And that was the DOS days. And of course, I wrote it all in speech. There were no braille displays in those days.
Right.
So always evolving.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep,
Just like technology, you've got to evolve with it.
yeah.
Well, um, I'm wondering if there's any questions from
I haven't
people.
been reading the chat because I've been having piles of notes. Do you have a
Yes,
chat reader?
Jeff.
I'm looking through, I most of them I was either trying to pull into my commentary or
Ah,
let me just see here. Um, there was a comment from Isabella. I don't think she's still in here now, but she just said I can add that this was when we were talking about the editor. I can add that just because a university has an accessibility department or disability office, that they do does not mean they will be able to provide access in any way you need. Make sure to ask detailed questions. Some offices may never have had to work with a blind student before, for example. So I think that goes back to do your homework,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
it is the onus is on you as a student to actually and not to count on things being handed to you, which is probably a problem that we have also as TVIs that sometimes generated that we're guilty of solving the problems for folks too often.
Well, and with little kids, you really do need to do it because
Sure.
until they see how adults solve problems, they can't learn to solve problems.
Right.
certainly.
But then
Certainly.
you have to sort of grow up after a while and learn how to do your own advocacy and problem solving. Um, Anything else in the chat? I've got a few notes here if you need me to talk about anything else.
I don't see any other questions at this time. Just looking through the.
Okay. Well, I would like to say that one way to develop coding skills, if you're not really ready yet to learn a language, is to play text adventure games. And text adventure games require you solve problems. You have to get around the dragon. You have to keep from getting killed. And if you're doing text adventures, you have to do a lot of typing. So when I got my first iPod back in 2011, I decided I didn't want to have to depend on a Bluetooth keyboard. I wanted to be able to type on the screen. And I was terrible at it. I was so terrible at it. So what I did is I played adventure games on my iPod until I could type on my screen really well. And that was very motivating for me because if I was trying to actually take notes or do something boring, I wouldn't have done it. But in games, you always want to get to you want to get around the dragon, you know. So
Definitely.
that's how I learned how to type on my iPod. And I would say that if you're struggling to type or you're struggling to understand some of these problem solving things, play adventure games. It's really fun. If you love your iPad, you definitely should go and get the Swift Playgrounds. It is accessible. And I know our local Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco sells tactile drawings for Swift Playgrounds. And it's kind of a combination between a maze and coding lessons and a game. So if you like playing games and you want to learn how to code and you want to do something fun on your iPad, the Swift Playgrounds are the way to go. And again, if you find them confusing, go ahead and spend 40 bucks and buy the tactile diagrams because they will help you understand the layouts of the screens. However, they work great with VoiceOver. You can play them without the diagrams. The diagrams just make it a little easier.
Ah, but you have to be a good voiceover user.
Yeah, but this is what I'm seeing, and
Yeah.
this is true of my sighted students as well. I get a lot of students, blind, sighted, doesn't matter, who are super good with their iPods and iPhones and iPads, but they don't know how to use a computer. And so
Yeah.
if you're at that stage yet where you really don't know how to use a computer, but you want to start making steps toward learning some coding, and this is really good for, say, someone who's in the seventh or eighth grade yet, maybe isn't taking computer classes yet. Get out that iPad and play with the Swift Playgrounds because it can be really fun.
Yeah.
Anything else in the chat?
I,
Okay. If not, I mean, I have a lot of stuff written down here, so just tell me when to be quiet.
We're quickly
Um,
approaching, but if you got a little bit more, we would love to hear.
Yeah,
okay, so you really need to advocate with your Department of Rehab before you go to
Okay.
college. And it's really good if you can get an adult who's written letters before justifying why you need something. Your TBI can write. I write letters for my students all the time to the rehab counselor saying, this student needs a laptop. No, this student does not need an iPad. Because what happens is rehab counselors tend to buy what's been heavily marketed. So I've seen rehab counselors who are easier to convince to buy a Braille Sense than to buy a laptop, even though a laptop's a lot cheaper because it's been so marketed to them. Or I've seen rehab counselors who want all their blind college students to get iPads. Well, if you many online classes will not let you use an iPad to take an exam. So
yeah,
when you're advocating with rehab, you don't want to get the tools that sound cool. You want to get the tools that are going to forward you in your progress as a college student. And if you want the cool tools, then that's the time to go to the Lions Club or the Rotary Club and say, hey, I need help. I need an iPad for college. But get rehab to spend money on the tools you're really, really going to need. Um, and I've done the same thing with employers. Once I've worked with an employer for several years, and I know I need something, I'll say, I'd be a lot faster in this job if you could buy a braille display for me. And so again, it's all about learning how to advocate, not so much for what you need and what's cool, which is what you do when you're a kid, right? But
Mhm.
what's going to be the most useful for you. And then another thing here I have in my notes about things to learn. Make sure you learn how to access all the different forms of cloud storage because you're going to take a class where the instructor puts everything on OneDrive. And then you're going to take another class where everything's on Google Drive. And oh, guess what? They are using Google Docs in the class. And then you're going to take a class where the instructor puts everything in Dropbox, which is much easier to use. Um, so we see that a lot in college where every professor has a different way of giving you the information. And so the more of these different storage solutions you're not going to be wasting time in class figuring out, oh my gosh, how do I download this thing from OneDrive? If you already know how to use it, especially any of these free tools that you think might be getting used in your next class. And so before your semester starts, try to get in touch with your professor and say, what digital tools are you expecting me to know how to use? I'm visually impaired. It's going to take me a while to learn them. So it would be helpful if you told me ahead of time what you feel I'm going to need to know. And you're laying your cards on the table too. You're saying, okay, I'm willing to try this, but I may need a little extra time. And I have my students all the time to write letters to their professor that say things like, I'm going to need to get my book in an alternate format, so can you please give me the book information now because it's going to take DSS a few weeks to track down this book in the format that's easiest for me to read. And yeah, and regarding books, it's really important if you're reading a book and the thing doesn't make sense or it's a picture. I was taking a class at SQL and they were talking about inner joins and outer joins, and everything they talked about was a picture. And I was like, this does not make any sense to me at all. So when that happens, you need to go get another book that uses text to explain the same concept. That's very important. Bookshare is your friend. Learning Ally is your friend. Make sure you don't give up when a concept doesn't make sense.
Yes.
absolutely.
Very important to have a repertoire of resources at your disposal and don't limit yourself. So. Deborah, I want to thank you for all your words of wisdom. I want to remind everyone that many of the pointers Deborah has provided us, a concise list of some of her recommendations as far as with programs, pros and cons. Many of the bullet points she talked about today are included in that document that's in our shared drive.
Yep.
So thank you again, Deborah. Your wisdom resonates, I think, with our audience very much. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're
Um,
welcome. Thanks for having me.
of course.
Yeah, thank
Um,
you so much.
we're quickly approaching the 4:30, so I kind of want to start wrapping things up. I want to thank all of our speakers today for taking the time to share your knowledge and expertise with our audience. The recordings are very well received as well. So as a reminder, many of you, if you need to review this, be a little patient. It'll probably take us I'm going to say a couple weeks to get this content uploaded and hopefully chaptered, so it's a little bit easier to maneuver. APH has been working on getting our playlist to be a little more user friendly. So we want to continue that path with this as well because we know that many people are looking for very specific content. So look for that in the next couple of weeks. The documents, of course, will be left in the shared drive, so you'll have access to that. I would also like to thank everyone who joined us today. We very much appreciate and respect your time and happy to have you here and learn with us. Um, if you haven't already done so, I'm going to give us a shameless plug. We will be continuing this conversation a little bit further in the month of January, where we'll be discussing our Day of Code in recap. In addition to just talking about our days of code from this past year, we'll also be highlighting blocks for all. So there'll be a little learning in addition to not just talking about our days of code, but also an opportunity to see how engagement for all types of learners with block coding. And that webinar will be hosted on it's a Wednesday, I believe, if I get this wrong.
Yes,
It's Wednesday, January 21st of next year, 2026. It'll soon be here at
the
3
Wednes
p.m. Eastern.
the Wednesday after Martin Luther King Jr. Day. That's
Yes.
how I'm remembering it.
Yes, yes. So we hope that some of you will be able to join us for that, especially if you're interested in learning more about the Days of Code. I encourage you all to check out the Hive resources and any of the resources on the aph.org website. We will continue throughout the year to add new content and links and updates. And any of you who have great contacts or information to share out, please feel free to poke either Leslie or outreach at aph.org because we're always looking to build our community larger. Um, I do want to drop the registration link for the Day of Code event into the chat in case anyone would like to go ahead and get that in place already.
And
I'm
I
going to
want to
go ahead and
say a really
you
big
can,
thank you to our captioner
yes, Shelly, thank
for
you for,
Shelley, who has stuck with us for 4.5 hours. So
yeah.